If you've ever wanted to become an environment artist, well, now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Environment Artist Survival Kit, a brand new course designed to take you from a complete beginner to an absolute master in Unreal Engine. You're going to be creating everything you see on the screen here. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, early bird pricing is just starting. The course has just dropped. So if you want to get the course at a reduced price, hop on right now and grab it before it's too late. Let's get into the video.
Hey everyone, my name is Tristan LaCroix and I'm a 3D environment artist. Thanks for having me on the channel. I'm going to talk a bit about my workflow and some techniques that I use to create my latest 3D environment, Staros, the Impaled Capital. I'll take you through my reference gathering, modeling, texturing, lighting process, and also some VFX. I hope that you learned something you can use in your own work or just enjoy sitting back and seeing how I make stuff like this. I started out like I usually do for any 3D art that I'm making and used PureRef to gather some reference images for this project. It's a good simple program just to get all your reference images in one spot. A huge inspiration for this environment was the Soul series in Elden Ring, which might be pretty overtly apparent, honestly. From Software's world building environments are masterful, and if I could replicate even part of the overall quality and depth of one of their environments, I would consider this project a giant success. Areas such as Raya Lucaria and Nokron from Elden Ring and Anne Orlando from Dark Souls 1 served as great reference here. I also gathered reference images from Gothic, Roman, and medieval architecture from real-world cathedrals and famous structures to create something recognizable but interesting in its own way. I wanted things to feel familiar enough with the castle aesthetics, but unique in terms of architectural motifs and ornate designs. When I start blocking out a larger environment like this, I try to break down what I actually want from the project as a whole. It's easier for me to create something if it all revolves around a central theme, so that the world you create feels cohesive and everything belongs together. I started with a really basic idea that I thought was cool. Giant sword stabbing a building. So I decided to run with that, and then I did some general world building and backstory around the concept. I find this can really help you stick to a central theme throughout the environment art project. Try to make a location that is the result of a history, not just buildings that you placed there today. In Unreal, I start with basic blockout of models using primitives to lay out key features that I know for sure I want in the final scene. It's fine to spend a good amount of time in this phase, because even great assets with poor composition really diminishes the impact of the environment. If it looks great with giant white blocks, it'll look amazing with polished assets. In a scene with so many distant buildings and features, having a close-up structure where you can have the features that fit the scale of use by a human, such as steps, pottery, and the height of railings, goes a long way in helping to convey scale and give the larger structures in the distance a more immense feel. I did all of my modeling for this project in Maya. Sometimes I'll use ZBrush to sculpt things like damage or create materials, but since I knew texture fidelity was less of a focus on this project, I opted for poly modeling everything, which saved me a lot of time in baking and just overall workload. I started the modeling process by trying to nail the general aesthetic of a few buildings, since I knew that would dictate how I modeled the rest of the architecture in the scene. I wanted to design a few accent motifs that could be used all around the scene, like these interlocking pointed arches and the symbol of the arch with a spike running through the middle. That symbol was to reflect the giant impaling swords, and I used it to top a lot of the buildings as well as on the flag and banners. It works as some kind of nationalistic or religious iconography. Making these radially symmetrical buildings and towers was actually a pretty quick process. I just made a single side's details, then grabbed those and used Duplicate Special to dupe the features all around the base in a single button push. Same for UVs, you just make them once and then you use that feature where you can. I designed much of this scene to be modular. The walls, bridge, buildings, and stairs were all made to be placed multiple times around the scene and snapped together to easily create variation where possible. It's important to emphasize the idea of big, medium, and small forms in your scene. Big being the buildings and giant sword here, medium are the steps and architectural accents, and small stuff is like pots, banners, and small surface detail. Having too many large forms and little to no small or medium forms can make scale impossible, and having too many small forms makes the area look too noisy and repetitive, so you want to strike a good balance between the three, which is usually more small than medium and more medium than big. I used the Unreal Landscape sculpting tools here to lay out the ground and build up some mountains in the distance. These didn't need to be super detailed, so I didn't use any height maps or anything too complicated for this. I used Substance Painter and Clip Studio for all my texturing on this project. I started by creating a base stone texture since I knew the bulk of assets would need to use a similar material. I made sure not to make the textures too noisy since I knew there would be so much visible in one shot. You don't want to distract from the intended focal points in the scene. You don't want people's eyes to be drawn to like the floor over a giant palace with the sword sticking through it in the background. So most of my materials ended up pretty low contrast and I kept my normal map intensity fairly low. Since things are mostly distant in this scene, I didn't have to go with super high resolution textures, and I knew that the atmospheric fog and lighting would obfuscate really fine details in my textures, so this let me get a lot of work done pretty quickly, and it saved a ton on performance. I feel like shortcuts like that should be taken wherever possible. Large projects like this have their own sets of problems to solve, so whenever you can do something faster for no decrease in quality in the final result, I say go for it. The material setup in Unreal here was pretty simple. I didn't do anything too complicated. I did make a material that adds a waving effect to the giant banner on the main palace in the background in order to add some more motion to the scene. Basically, it just moves the vertices on the flag using a sine node over time, and I mask out the leftmost vertices so the part of the flag that's connected to the pole doesn't move. It's a pretty bare bones method of getting a waving flag in there, but it's a simpler and faster way than setting up a cloth simulation, and for my purposes here, it does the job fine. The tree canopy and the ivy are the only two vegetation assets I had to make for this project. The tree canopy in particular helped me cover a lot of ground and create good layering in the distance. It's just made with simple leaf cards, with an alpha mask and texture laid out in Clip Studio, and I added a few hue shift nodes to edit the leaf color and saturation in Engine. I also made a basic ivy asset just to scatter around on closer objects and make things look a bit more overgrown, like they've been sitting like this for a while. Then I just used the foliage brush to paint out the areas that I wanted. Oh, and something to look out for, if you find yourself painting foliage in Unreal on your own meshes and it doesn't let you paint in certain areas, stuff like vertical faces, it's probably due to this ground slope angle max setting here. At 0, it'll only let you paint on top flat surfaces of your mesh, stuff like up on the Z axis pretty much. But if you increase that, then you can paint stuff on the vertical faces again. Next, I set up some decals to add some variation on repeating areas like the larger walls or the walkway on the bridge. Pretty much anywhere there's a large area of a repeating texture. While it looks fine on its own, it'd be so much better if you add points of visual interest and points of visual rest. The two main decals that I used here were the moss and the puddles. The moss was just a high resolution image of moss that I edited to have softer edges with an alpha mask and lower contrast so it fits my scene correctly. The puddle is just an alpha mask with a roughness value near 0. Decals are super versatile and easy to use. They add a lot to a scene for very little work to set them up. The sky and lighting were in constant flux during this project. I generally knew what I wanted, but it took a lot of iterating to get it how I liked. I got the initial overcast look of the clouds by messing with the volumetric cloud settings. Then I added some accent cloud cards to build out the sky's composition exactly how I wanted it. I liked the idea of the light cracking through the clouds with god rays highlighting the main palace area, and having it be peeking over the high castle wall on the right. So I just grabbed a basic directional light and positioned it at the angle that I liked and messed with the light color, light shaft bloom, and other settings until I got it to a spot where I thought it looked pretty good. I also added some point lights in select areas to create highlights that helped guide the eye around the scene a bit. For the fog, I started with an exponential height fog and increased the density and edited the height fall off and the color. I used a similar method for the rest of the fog as I did for the clouds. I wanted a more deliberate, settled fog and mist look, so I made some panning texture cards and used them to create layering throughout the scene. God rays were going to be a big part of the scene and are actually included in the default starter content in Unreal Engine. Just look under Settings, Show Engine Content, Engine, Content, and search Light Beam. It's a great resource for simple hand-placed light shafts, and it's easy to edit these to match the color and intensity that you want for your environment. Next was the birds flying in the background. Birds are a great way to represent scale, and I found this method from Guido Ponzini's YouTube tutorial on flying birds in Niagara. It's a similar technique to the waving flag in that you're masking out the base of the wings to make their flapping look natural at a distance. The Niagara system spawns in a group of the birds and has them each flapping and moving at different speeds. Now up close, this looks bad, but it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to spend too much time making a great looking bird model and texture considering their tiny size on the screen at this distance. Lastly, I made the simple ember/light dust effect in Niagara. It pretty much just spawns a bunch of these little sprites with an emissive color applied and float around a bit until they fade away. With all the assets, lighting, and effects done, all that was left to do was to get a few good shots of the finished scene. I had a great time working on this piece. This project was a lot of fun, and it was great practice in a lot of different areas for environment art. There's obviously a lot to pack into a single video, so if you have any questions or just want to reach out, feel free to contact me over on ArtStation. Thanks again to Stylized Station for having me on today. I've also started streaming some 3D art and games over at twitch.tv/thelowpolycount. I'm just getting started over there, you should come hang out.